Don't get in the boat. The girl's voice came from behind the woodshed, so quiet that Grant Holloway almost mistook it for the wind coming off the inlet. He had been walking down the stone path toward the private dock, his leather overnight bag in one hand, his phone in the other, already thinking about the meeting on Bowen Island and the ferry he would miss if he did not leave in the next 4 minutes. Now he was standing perfectly still on the wet flagstone, looking at a small girl in a green rain jacket who had stepped out from behind the stacked firewood as if she had been waiting there since before dawn. "What did you say?" Grant asked. He recognized her, or at least he thought he did. The caretaker's daughter, Ruth's child. Maybe 10 years old. He had seen her a handful of times walking the edge of the property with a notebook in her hand drawing the herons that stood in the shallows near the boathouse. He could not remember her name. "Please don't get in the boat," the girl repeated. Her eyes were very wide and very still, and did not belong to a child who was playing a game. There's something wrong with it. "I heard them last night. They changed something inside." Grant looked down the path toward the dock. His boat, a 34-foot cabin cruiser named the Pendrell, was tied in its usual slip, rocking gently in the gray morning chop. His deckhand, a young man named Corey, was standing at the stern, coiling a line the way he always did before a crossing. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look on a Tuesday morning in early October on the North Shore. "Who did you hear?" Grant asked carefully. He kept his voice low, the way he kept it in boardrooms when someone said something that changed the shape of a deal. "Mrs. Holloway," the girl whispered, "and a man I don't know. They were in the boathouse after midnight. I was on the dock because I couldn't sleep. I heard them talking about the engine and the fuel line and something about the crossing near the point where the current pulls. The man said it would look like a mechanical failure," he said. "Nobody would question it because the yacht's cold enough this time of year, sir, that even if someone found the boat fast, it would already be too late." Grant felt the morning air enter his lungs and stopped there. He held it for a long time before letting it go. He had spent 40 years building one of the largest commercial real estate firms in British Columbia. He had survived recessions, hostile takeovers, a lawsuit that lasted 6 years and cost him 2 friendships he had thought were permanent. He had trained himself long ago not to react to information until he understood its shape. But the girl's eyes were not lying. They were the eyes of someone who had spent the entire night deciding whether to speak and had only just found the courage. "What's your name?" he asked. "Wren," she said. "Wren." He repeated it slowly, the way a man repeats something he intends to remember. "Tell me exactly what you heard. Every word you can remember. Don't skip anything." Wren took a breath. Her small hands were pressed flat against the sides of her rain jacket, holding herself steady. "I was sitting at the end of the dock with my legs over the edge," she said. "My mom doesn't know I go there at night. I like listening to the water. It was after midnight because I checked my watch. I heard the boathouse door open and I crawled behind the storage locker so they wouldn't see me." "Go on." "Mrs. Holloway came in first. She had a flashlight. Then the man. He was tall, and he talked quiet like he was used to not being heard. He went straight to the engine compartment. He knew where everything was. He didn't have to look." Grant glanced toward the dock. Corey had finished coiling the line and was now checking something near the bow, his back turned. "What did they say?" Grant asked. The man said the fuel line was the easiest part. He said he'd scored it so it would hold for the first 20 minutes, long enough to get past the breakwater and into the open channel. He said the fumes would build up in the cabin, and when the engine overheated, the whole thing would go up fast. He said the water temperature off the point was 8 degrees, and that at 8 degrees a man Mr. Holloway's age would have maybe 15 minutes before his body stopped working, even if he made it out of the boat. The girl paused. Her chin trembled once, then steadied, and then Mrs. Holloway said, "After this, I will finally have what he promised me and what he never delivered. Every single thing." Grant Holloway stood on the wet stone path behind the woodshed with his overnight bag hanging from his hand and felt something large and quiet shift inside him, the way the foundation of a building shifts before anyone above notices. He did not feel anger, not yet. He felt the specific stillness of a man who has just been told the ground he is standing on is not solid. Diane. He had married her 11 years ago in a small ceremony at a vineyard in the Okanagan. She had worn a pale yellow dress and laughed when the wind blew her hair across her face during the vows. She had held his hand at his mother's funeral. She had sat beside him through 3 surgeries on his left knee without complaint. She had told him 2 nights ago over dinner that she was proud of him for finally slowing down, for agreeing to sell the company, for choosing the life they had always talked about. And sometime after midnight, while he slept upstairs in the bedroom they had shared for a decade, she had stood in his boathouse with another man and planned the exact manner of his death. "Wren," Grant said quietly, "does your mother know you heard this?" "No, sir." "Good. I need you to go back inside. Tell your mother your stomach hurts. Stay in your room. Don't talk to anyone about this. Can you do that?" The girl nodded. Then she looked up at him with something in her face that he would remember for a very long time. "I almost didn't say anything," she said. "I was scared you wouldn't believe me." "I believe you," Grant said. "And what you just did is the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me. I need you to remember that." Wren turned and walked quickly along the hedge line toward the caretaker's cottage, her green jacket disappearing into the gray morning like a small bright leaf carried by the wind. Grant stood alone behind the woodshed. He could hear the water lapping against the dock pilings. He could hear Corey moving around on the pendrel. He could hear, somewhere inside the house, the sound of a radio playing the kind of soft music Diane listened to while she made her morning tea. He took out his phone and called the only number he had ever called in a crisis. The line rang 3 times. "It's 7 in the morning, Grant." Hugh Pennington's voice was not annoyed, only careful. He had been Grant's lawyer for 26 years. He had seen Grant through a divorce, a hostile board vote, a tax audit that lasted 14 months, and one very bad night in a hospital waiting room in 2019. He knew the sound of Grant's voice the way a doctor knows the sound of a heartbeat that has changed its rhythm. "I need you to meet me in 45 minutes, Grant said. "The cafe on Lonsdale, the one with the blue door. Bring everything you have on my insurance policies, the marine policy, the life policy. Everything Diane has access to. And Hugh, don't tell anyone." Hugh was silent for exactly 2 seconds. "I'm already getting dressed," he said. Grant looked down the path one more time. Corey was now standing at the dock with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking toward the house, waiting. Grant took a breath, put his phone in his coat, and walked not toward the dock, but around the side of the house, toward the front drive. He moved at his normal pace. He did not hurry. He had learned decades ago that urgency was something you carried inside, not something you showed. His car was parked where it always was, a dark gray SUV with mud on the wheel wells from the logging road he had driven last weekend. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. As he turned onto Marine Drive, he glanced in the mirror. The house sat against the hillside above the inlet, large and stone-faced and quiet. He had built it 23 years ago. He had chosen every window, every beam, every angle of the roofline so that from inside you could see the water from almost any room. He had thought of it as the place where he would grow old. He wondered now how long it had been someone else's plan entirely. Hugh Pennington was already at the cafe when Grant arrived. He was sitting at the corner table in the same gray wool coat he had worn to every meeting for as long as Grant could remember, 2 coffees on the table, a leather portfolio beside his chair. He stood when Grant came in. They did not shake hands. They had known each other too long for that. Grant sat down and told him everything. He spoke in the same flat, measured voice he used when delivering bad quarterly numbers to a board of directors. He did not leave anything out. He told him about Wren, about the boathouse, about the fuel line, about the water temperature, about the words Diane had used. He spoke for 12 minutes without stopping. Hugh listened the way good lawyers listen. He did not interrupt. He did not write anything down. When Grant finished, Hugh opened the leather portfolio and laid 4 pages on the table. "Your life insurance," he said. "Taken out 19 years ago. Original coverage was $5 million. It was adjusted twice. The first adjustment was routine. 12 years ago when the company went through its second round of expansion. Coverage went to $9 million. I was present for that signing." He tapped the second document. "The second adjustment was 8 months ago. Coverage was raised to $22 million. A double indemnity clause was added for accidental death, which would bring the total payout to $44 million under specific circumstances, including death by drowning or mechanical failure at sea. The beneficiary clause was simplified. All contingency language was removed. Diane is now the sole and unconditional beneficiary." Grant stared at the page. He could see his own signature at the bottom. He recognized it, the slight forward lean of the G, the way the T crossed too high. But he did not remember signing this document. "I didn't sign this, Hugh. I know you didn't. Because 8 months ago, you were in Sid's Calgary for 2 weeks dealing with the Foothills project. I checked my calendar this morning. You were nowhere near Vancouver on the date this was notarized. Then it's forged. Yes. And whoever forged it had access to samples of your signature, your personal identification numbers, and a notary willing to cooperate. That is not an amateur operation, Grant. That is someone who has done this kind of work before." Grant picked up his coffee. It was still hot. He held it without drinking. "The man in the boathouse," he said. "I need to know who he is." "I've already made a call," Hugh said. "There's an investigator I've worked with for years. Her name is Abigail Cortez. She's thorough and she's quiet. She'll have something for us by this evening." Grant nodded slowly. "And Diane? For now you go home. You act as if nothing has changed. You tell her the meeting on Bowen was canceled. You eat dinner with her. You let her believe the boat is still an option for later in the week. The longer she thinks the plan is intact, the more room we have to find out who this man is and how deep this goes. Grant looked out the window of the cafe at the gray October street. A woman was walking a dog past the bookshop. A bus was pulling away from the curb. The city was doing what it always did, and none of it knew that a man had almost climbed into his own coffin that morning. He drove home. Diane was in the kitchen when he came through the front door. She was slicing fruit at the counter, wearing the oatmeal cardigan he had bought her last Christmas. She looked up with the warm, slightly surprised expression she always wore when his schedule changed. "You're back early," she said. "The meeting was pushed to Thursday," Grant said. "Bowen Island, logistics. The venue had a plumbing issue." "Oh, that's too bad. Well, at least we get a morning together." She smiled at him. He smiled back. He smiled back. He watched her hands as she sliced a pear, the small, precise movements, the way she set the knife down gently on the cutting board. Those same hands had held a flashlight in his boathouse 12 hours ago while a man she had chosen bent over the engine of his boat and made the adjustments that were supposed to kill him. He ate the fruit she offered him. He sat at the kitchen island and drank the tea she made. He talked to her about the weather and the garden and the roofer who was coming on Friday. He did all of this in the careful, practiced way of a man who had spent his career sitting across from people who were lying to him and had learned never to let them see that he knew. That evening, Hugh called. "Abigail found him," he said. "His name is Liam Ashford. That's the name he's using now. His real name is Patrick Soule, born in Winnipeg in 1979. He changed his name in 2012 after the death of his common-law partner in Nova Scotia. Her name was Gillian Falk. She was 51. She drowned when her sailboat capsized off Peggy's Cove. The investigation was closed after 3 months, ruled accidental. Her estate, including a life insurance payout of $2.3 million, went entirely to him." Grant closed his eyes. "There's more," Hugh continued. "In 2016, he was involved with a woman in Kelowna named Andrea Belie. She was a retired physician, wealthy, no children. They were together for 2 years. She died in 2018. Carbon monoxide poisoning in her home. The furnace was found to be faulty. The insurance payout was $3.7 million. He left the province within 6 weeks. And now he's here," Grant said quietly. "Now he's here. With your wife, with a $44 million policy, and a boat with a scored fuel line." Grant sat in his study for a long time after the call ended. The room was dark except for the desk lamp. Through the window he could see the dock, and beyond it the inlet flat and black under the October sky. He thought about Gillian Falk sailing alone off Peggy's Cove. He thought about Andrea Beaulieu going to sleep in her own house and never waking up. He thought about the cold precision of a man who had learned that certain kinds of death could be made to look like accidents if you were patient enough and careful enough and willing to wait. He thought about Diane, sitting across from him at dinner, touching his hand, asking if he wanted more wine. "Hugh," he said when he called back, "I don't want him arrested tomorrow. I want him caught in a way that he cannot walk away from. He's done this twice and walked free both times. I will not be the third." Hugh was quiet for a moment. "That is the harder path," he said. "I know. Then we do it your way. But Grant, this means going back on that boat." "Yes," Grant said. "It does." They spent the next 2 days building the trap. Hugh coordinated with Abigail, who brought in a marine mechanic she trusted, a man who had spent 20 years with the Coast Guard and knew fuel systems the way a surgeon knows anatomy. The mechanic went aboard the Pendrell at 3 in the morning on Wednesday. While Grant and Diane slept, or while Grant lay awake in the dark, listening to Diane's breathing beside him and wondering when exactly the woman next to him had stopped being the person he had married. The mechanic found the scored fuel line exactly where Wren had said it would be. He photographed it, documented the modification, and then repaired it, so precisely that anyone checking would believe it was still compromised. He also installed a small waterproof GPS tracker in the engine housing and a second one beneath the helm console. On Wednesday evening, Grant mentioned the boat over dinner. "I think I'll take the Pendrell to Bowen on Thursday instead of driving to the ferry," he said casually. "The water's been calm all week. Might be the last good crossing before the storms come in." Diane set down her fork. She did not react immediately. She took a sip of water, patted her lips with her napkin, and then looked at him with an expression of mild concern that Grant now understood was as rehearsed as a line in a play. "Are you sure?" she said. "The weather can turn so fast this time of year. I've made the crossing 100 times. Corey will have her ready by 8. Well, if you're sure." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Just promise me you'll check the forecast before you leave. I always do." That night, Grant walked down to the caretaker's cottage. Ruth opened the door and let him in without a word. She had the same tired, intelligent face she always had, and she did not ask why he was there because he had told her everything 2 nights earlier, sitting at her kitchen table while Wren slept in the next room. "How is she?" Grant asked quiet. Ruth said, "She's been drawing the same thing all week. The boathouse, over and over. After Thursday, it'll be done. And then? And then we talk about what comes next for you and for her." Ruth nodded once. She did not ask for details. She had the kind of trust that came not from naivety but from having watched a man carefully for 3 years and decided he was worth believing. Thursday morning arrived gray and still. Grant came downstairs at 7:30 in his sailing jacket, his overnight bag over his shoulder. Diane was at the front door. She handed him a thermos of coffee. She straightened the collar of his jacket. She kissed him on the cheek. "Be careful out there," she said. Her voice was soft, her eyes were steady. She looked exactly like a woman who loved her husband and worried about him when he went out on the water. Grant looked at her for one long moment. He looked at the face he had woken up beside for 11 years. He looked at the small lines around her eyes that he had once thought were beautiful because they meant she had spent a decade smiling beside him. He understood now that at least some of those smiles had been practiced for this morning. "I'll call you when I get there," he said. He walked down the stone path toward the dock. The pendrel was waiting in her slip, rocking gently. Corey was at the stern, checking the lines. The morning fog was just beginning to lift off the inlet, and through it Grant could see the far shore of the North Shore Mountains, gray and massive and indifferent. He stepped aboard. Corey cast off. The engine started cleanly, the way it was supposed to, because a man who had spent 20 years with the Coast Guard had made sure it would. They pulled out of the slip and turned toward the open water. Grant stood at the helm and watched the house grow smaller behind him. He could see the kitchen window. He could see, or thought he could see, the shape of someone standing there watching. For the first 15 minutes, they followed the normal route. They passed the breakwater. They entered the channel. The water was calm, the wind light from the southeast. The mountains on either side of the inlet were hidden in cloud. At the 20-minute mark, the point where the fuel line was supposed to fail, where the fumes were supposed to build, where the engine was supposed to overheat and the boat was supposed to become a floating coffin in 8-degree water, Grant picked up his phone. 2 vehicles were already moving. Abigail's team had been watching Diane's phone since Tuesday. The moment Grant's boat had cleared the breakwater, Diane had sent a single text message to a number registered under a false name. The message contained 2 words: "He's gone." Within 4 minutes of that message, a dark blue pickup truck had pulled out of a parking lot 6 blocks from the house and begun driving toward Marine Drive. The driver was Liam Ashford. He was heading to the house. He believed Grant Holloway was 20 minutes from dying on the open water. He did not know that the fuel line had been repaired. He did not know that the boat was tracking perfectly on GPS. He did not know that a sergeant with the RCMP's Major Crimes Unit was sitting in an unmarked car 200 meters from the Holloway driveway, waiting for the signal. Grant made the call. "Hugh, he's moving. Tell Sergeant Muir it's time." Then he turned the pendrel around and headed for home. The crossing back took 22 minutes. Grant pushed the throttle higher than he normally would. The bow cut through the flat gray water and threw spray across the windscreen. Corey stood beside him and said nothing because there was nothing to say. When they rounded the point and the house came into view, Grant could see the blue pickup truck in the driveway. He could see the unmarked RCMP vehicle parked across the entrance to the lane. He could see 2 officers on the front steps, and through the tall windows of the kitchen, he could see 2 figures standing close together near the island where he had eaten breakfast that morning. One of them was Diane. The other was a tall man with dark hair and a careful posture, the kind of man who had learned to stand in other people's houses as if he belonged there. Grant tied the pendrel to the dock and walked up the stone path. Sergeant Muir met him halfway. "She didn't run," the sergeant said quietly. "When we came through the door, she was standing in the kitchen. He tried to leave through the back. We had someone waiting." "What did she say?" she said. "I didn't know about the others. She said it 3 times. Grant nodded slowly. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel the satisfaction he had expected. He felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has held his breath for 3 days and is only now remembering how to let it go. They brought Diane out of the house 10 minutes later. She walked between 2 officers with her hands behind her back. Her face neither angry nor broken, but something in between. Something that looked like the face of a person who had been running a very long calculation in her head and had just discovered she'd just made an error on the first line. As she passed Grant on the front walk, she stopped. The officers let her. She looked at him the way you look at a door you have just closed for the last time. "I'm sorry," she said. Grant looked at her. He had planned to say nothing. He had spent 2 days deciding to say nothing. But standing there in the gray morning with the inlet behind him and the mountains above him and the sound of the water against the dock pilings, he found that he had one thing left. 11 years, Diane. 11 years, and I would have given you anything you asked for. All you had to do was ask. She closed her eyes. The officers guided her to the car. The car drove away. The case moved quickly. Patrick Soule, who had called himself Liam Ashford, was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and 2 counts of identity-related offenses. The cases in Nova Scotia and Kelowna were reopened within a week. New forensic evidence was ordered in both. The marine mechanics' documentation of the scored fuel line became the centerpiece of the Crown's case. The forged insurance documents were traced to a notary in Surrey who had been paid $12,000 in cash and who, when confronted, provided a full statement within 40 minutes. Diane pleaded guilty to conspiracy. Her lawyer told the court she had been manipulated by a man who had spent years perfecting the art of making women believe they had no other choice. The judge listened carefully and sentenced her according to the law, which does not make exceptions for the quality of the manipulation, only for the seriousness of the act. Grant did not attend the sentencing. He had been there for the first hearing, and that had been enough. There were some things a man did not need to see twice to understand. In the weeks that followed, Grant made changes to the house. He moved his bedroom to the east side, where the morning light came through unobstructed and where he could see the mountains without seeing the dock. He had the boathouse cleaned, repainted, and left empty. He donated the Pendrell to a sailing school in Deep Cove. He kept the garden. He hired a woman named Barb, who had run a small inn on Galliano Island for 20 years and who filled the kitchen with the smell of baking bread and did not ask questions about why a man with 12 rooms chose to eat his breakfast standing at the counter. Ruth stayed. Grant had asked her if she wanted to, and she had taken a week to think about it, and then she had come to his study door and said simply, "Wren doesn't want to leave the Herons." That was enough. Grant arranged for Wren to attend a private school in West Vancouver. He paid for everything, tuition, books, the art supplies she went through, at a rate that made the school secretary call Ruth twice to confirm the purchase orders were correct. He did not call it charity. He called it the least a man could do for someone who had saved his life before she was old enough to drive. On a Saturday morning in late April, 6 months after the morning behind the woodshed, Grant walked down to the dock and found Wren sitting on the edge with her legs hanging over the water, a sketchbook open on her knees. She was drawing a great blue heron that was standing motionless in the shallows near the boathouse, its neck curved like a question mark against the gray-green water. Grant sat down beside her. He did not say anything for a while. The heron did not move. The water lapped softly against the pilings. The mountains across the inlet were still wearing their winter snow at the peaks, but the tree line below had turned the soft, bright green that only lasts for a few weeks in spring before it deepens into summer. "You still draw," he said. "My dad used to draw," Wren said. She did not look up from the page. "Mom says he drew on everything, envelope napkins, the margins of his textbooks. She says I got it from him." Grant had not known this. He nodded slowly. "Then it's yours honestly," he said. They sat in silence for another moment. The heron shifted its weight from one leg to the other and then went still again. "Mr. Holloway," Wren said quietly, "do you ever still think about that morning?" Grant considered the question for a long time because she deserved a real answer. "Sometimes," he said. "Not the way I did at first. But sometimes I wake up early and I hear the water against the dock and I think about how close I came to walking past you and not stopping, and what I feel then isn't exactly fear. It's more like thankfulness that hasn't quite learned how to be quiet yet." Wren nodded. She added a single careful line to the heron's wing. "My mom says that doing the right thing doesn't always make your life easier," she said, "but it means you can look at yourself without having to look away." Grant watched the heron lift slowly from the shallows, its wide gray wings beating once, twice, 3 times before it cleared the water and rose above the dock and banked out over the inlet toward the far shore. "Your mom," he said, "has been right about nearly everything.